All right. So tonight we're going to cover due diligence 1. Hopefully by now you're starting to make progress finding companies that you think are interesting and you might want to invest in. Again, those 3 companies are due, and all you have to do is submit the name, email, or not email, name of the company, the web address, and a quick blurb on what they do. Those are all due the 22nd of October. So, you know, you got a little bit of time, but not a lot of time to get those done. So that's the end of this week. The next phase, though, is starting to dive into doing your due diligence. And that's what we're going to cover tonight. And like I said, if it were me, I would pick 3 really strong companies, the 3 strongest companies I could. I'd start doing the due diligence on all 3 to see if any of them start falling out, and that you can coalesce behind the one that's the strongest. So tonight's agenda, we're going to talk about three main pieces of due diligence. We're going to talk about business model and strategy. We're going to talk about markets, and we're going to talk about competition. We're going to skip that. Okay, so business model and strategy. I tell my students at University Growth Fund all the time that it is incredibly important to understand the pain point of the company that the company is trying to solve. I love this quote by Mike Maples at Floodgate. He's a phenomenal angel investor or seed stage investor. His firm has backed a ton of great companies like Lyft and others. And you know, he's like, look, we're looking for a pain so big you need a tourniquet. Like if you don't get that pain fixed or solved or treated, you are going to die. And ultimately, like as an investor, that's kind of what you're looking for. You're looking for pain points that are so big that people are desperate to have them fixed. Because if people are desperate to have them fixed, they're going to be willing to pay whatever it takes. And they're going to be willing to do whatever they can to get it, right? So we talk a lot in the industry about this concept of product market fit. It's when you start a company, you go out and you have this hypothesis. And the hypothesis is, you know, there's this pain point and we have a solution. And we think that the solution will solve that pain point for enough, like not just like a couple customers, but a lot of customers, a big market, right? But you don't know for sure until you actually build that product and start selling that product or trying to sell that product if it's something that people really want. And when you achieve product market fit, it should become easy to sell the product, right? People should be almost begging you to buy that product and use it because it's solving this pain point that they have. And sometimes they don't even know that they have the pain point until they see your product, right? I think all of us can think of numerous products that we buy and that we love that we didn't even know we needed it, right? It's like I didn't know I needed a smartphone until I eventually got one, and now like I feel naked if I don't have one, right? And so, you know, there are a lot of products out there that are kind of like that. But that's what you're looking for. You're looking for companies that can get to that point where they have a product and people are just clamoring for it ultimately because they all feel this pain point. Now, there are a lot of ways to have to feel pain, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that my arm has literally been, you know, going to fall off pain-wise. It could be like the pain of being bored, right? And that can actually be a pretty big and meaningful pain point that people are eager to solve. Hence why video games and Netflix and all of these other companies that solve that pain point have the potential of becoming really big and very lucrative businesses. It might be that it's a mission critical piece of your it could be mission critical software for your company, right? When we made our investment way back in the day in Instructure, which makes Canvas the learning management software, one of the things that was really interesting and compelling for us was how many people, well, how many universities had to have an LMS. They had to have a place. It was like mission critical to have a place for professors to post grades and assignments, and take class roll and all of those things. That was like mission critical. But then you layered on top of that, this pain point of it was so incredibly painful to work with the incumbent product, specifically Blackboard. And so, when we went out and we had our students that could testify to how painful that experience was, we talked to professors and they complained about how tedious Blackboard was. And then we talked to the IT departments, and they also expressed how challenging and frustrating it was to work with Blackboard. We knew, like, okay, here's a really interesting pain point, right? It's something that's mission critical, they have to have, and everybody hates it, right? And so it's not solving this huge pain point for a lot of people, which is what led to our investment in Instructure. And the reason they were so successful was they just had to go to these companies, or not companies, to these universities, show them what they were doing and how much better the use case was and the user experience. And universities were practically begging them to buy the product. They were ditching Blackboard. They were getting out of their long-term contracts. They were doing everything they could because they recognized how much better Instructure's Canvas product was over Blackboard, to the point that Blackboard actually had to give away the product their product in a few instances to keep customers from leaving. That's a pretty compelling place to be. The other thing is, if people are clamoring and they're just begging you for the product, it's like a painkiller versus a vitamin, right? If you have a migraine, you want a painkiller today, immediately, right now, and you will pay anything for it, right? Within reason. On the flip side, if you need some more vitamin C in your diet, there's a lot of places to sell vitamin C. It's not that big of an urgency. You'll get it, and you're probably not going to be willing to pay that much for it on a relative basis. So pain points, super important. Spend some time really understanding the pain point of the business. My rule of thumb is, until I can feel the pain point, like almost physically, I don't assume that I really understand it yet. And if I can't ever get there, it means either, shame on me for not spending the time to do it, or maybe it's just not that big of a pain point. And if it's not a really big pain point, then the business is probably going to really struggle to convince customers to buy their product. There are a lot of nice to have businesses and technologies out there. There are very few that are solving a really strong pain point. All right, so not to belabor that anymore. Hopefully you guys recognize who this guy is by the sign behind him. How many people have seen the movie The Founder? So in The Founder, anybody know what the movie's about? Anyone want to share? Is it really about a founder? Anybody there? All right. I'll fill you all in. First of all, go watch the movie. It's a good movie. It's about a gentleman named Ray Kroc, who was not the founder of McDonald's, but he was the guy that took the concept of McDonald's and turned it into the behemoth that it is today, through franchising. The story goes that he was in a bar with some friends, and he asked them, what business am I in? And what do you think he responded with? What would you say? What business is McDonald's in?
Most people responded by saying you're in the restaurant business or the burger business.
In the restaurant, the burger business. You say most people. So you've heard this story before. What was the punchline? What did he say?
He said, I'm in the real estate business.
Okay. And why did he say he was in the real estate business?
Because he purchased the land, and then the franchisees had to pay him a leasing fee to operate the McDonald's on that land.
That's right. And so that's definitely part of it. What's the other part? Why do you go to McDonald's? Does anybody go to McDonald's because they have the most delicious hamburgers that ever existed?
No, Ray Kroc saw the vision of McDonald's, of the brand of McDonald's, like the Golden Arches being a place where families could gather and kids could play. Yeah.
Okay, so there's some branding there, but what's really the magic of McDonald's?
It's open 24 hours and it's fast.
Okay,
They're everywhere.
they're everywhere. Question for you: how many people have made hamburgers before? And how many of you have made hamburgers that taste exactly the same every single time you've made them? Turns out it's actually a little more difficult than it sounds, right? What is McDonald's really selling at the end of the day? You guys have hinted at it. Anybody?
Consistency with their products.
Okay, that's part of it, but that's not quite what I'm looking for.
And experience.
Really? You go to McDonald's because it's a great experience? It is a great experience in one way, and that's what I'm looking for.
It's cheap.
Okay, I mean, it's kind of cheap. It's actually not all that cheap, but yeah, it's affordable. It's definitely affordable.
Because you know exactly what you're going to get every time.
You know exactly what you're going to get. That's part of it. All right, I'll save you guys the frustration. Think about it this way. You go to McDonald's because it is convenient. It is a convenient way to get food, right? Think about all the things that we just talked about. It's fast. It's consistent. It's affordable, right? You know, it's all over the place. They're everywhere, right? And not only are they everywhere, but they're in the best places, right? They're in the most convenient places, right? You're driving along the highway, boom, they're at the exit. You're at the airport, boom, they're in the airport, right? You're downtown, boom, they're downtown. Like wherever it is going to be the most convenient for you when you're hungry, McDonald's is mostly there, right? And so when you think about Ray Kroc and his response, like, I'm in the real estate business, he's in the real estate business in two ways. The first one is location, location, location. And if you want to provide, if the value that you are providing to customers is convenient nutrition, which is debatable depending on how you define nutrition, but convenient food, right? You need to be in hyper convenient locations. The flip side is, they're not the flip side, but the other way in which real estate is his business is that he then buys the most convenient, best locations, and then he forces his franchisees to lease from him, and he charges extremely high lease rates. And he does that because it's a way for him to extract the value of the rest of the business, and create control over the franchisees, right? If a franchisee goes off the reservation and says, we're going to start doing like steak sandwiches, they can basically kick them off the land because McDonald's owns the land. So they can force the franchisees to maintain consistency, which is important if what you're ultimately providing is convenience. If that makes sense. So what you got to be thinking about as you're evaluating your businesses is what business ultimately is the company in? What kind of value are they creating? In the case of McDonald's, it's not really hamburgers that's the value creation. The value creation is around convenience and convenient access to food. So this gets back to that pain point. It's not just like, oh, I'm hungry and McDonald's solves my pain point of giving me food. It's I'm hungry and I don't have time, energy, mental capacity, whatever it might be. I need something very convenient, and McDonald's is there to fill that gap and that need and that pain point. So if you think about, I mean, that's just an easy example because we're all used to it. But let's talk about some other like tech companies. So Facebook. What pain point does Facebook address? For whom? Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. Maybe not so much of WhatsApp. Anybody? Come on, I know you all use Instagram and Facebook. Everybody's asleep tonight.
Connecting with friends.
Yeah, you stay connected with friends. Okay. So that's the pain point, like you miss your friends. You want to stay connected to them.
It solves the problem of like sharing time. Like it's quick, it's instant. You can share something and it reaches across the world like instantly.
Okay. Okay. So the need that we have as humans to be social. That's kind of what it's solving. Question, how many of you pay for Facebook? Ooh, I don't pay for Facebook. So if I don't pay for Facebook, am I the customer? Who's Facebook's customer?
Facebook's customer is also businesses that use it for advertising purposes.
Mm-hmm. And so what's their pain point, Hannah?
I guess their customers' pain point is that they need to reach larger audiences, and they can reach, I mean, international and big, huge audience. I mean, I'm guessing just to advertise their products more because they don't have enough, and it might be a cheaper way to do it versus like advertisements on the like commercials and stuff like that.
Why might it be a cheaper, or maybe a better way to put it is a better way to advertise on Facebook versus like a billboard or a TV commercial?
Because everyone uses it.
Not only does everybody use it, what else?
They can use their algorithms to target a specific audience with their ads.
Yeah. Sam, you got something to add?
Yeah, all the content on Facebook is user created, and so it's also cheaper. You know, they don't have to like be paying to make a movie or put on a sporting event. The people are just making the content for them.
Okay, so that's a cost advantage, right, that Facebook has. But think about it this way. How many of you, if you looked at the ads that you see on Facebook versus the ads your parents see on Facebook, how many times are those ads going to be the same? Almost never, right? And the reason for that is because, as was mentioned, we give Facebook an inordinate amount of data about ourselves. Facebook then takes that and they effectively sell it to advertisers, right? They say, oh, Peter really likes board games. And so if you sell board games, if you're a board game company, you don't want to waste time selling to Dylan, who hates board games. You want to sell it to Peter, who loves board games. Because if you pay Facebook for an ad for Dylan, he doesn't care. That's wasted money, right? But if you put an ad on there for me around a board game, like I might find that interesting. I'm more likely to buy, right? And so that ad becomes a lot more valuable to me, right? They can target me specifically, or you with whatever product it is that you like and you're more likely to buy. And so the ads themselves are a lot more valuable. Facebook in turn can charge a lot more, but as an advertiser, I'm willing to pay that because I know that my ad will be put in front of somebody that's, you know, very likely to buy, right? Versus just putting it out there as a commercial and hoping that the right customers see it at the right time and are excited about, you know, about it. knowing full well that like, in some cases, 90% of the rest of the people that see that ad could care less, right? And actually, not only do they care less, it actually makes their lives worse because they're sick of ads and they may end up walking away with a negative impression about my company, right? So that is the pain point that Facebook is helping solve for these advertisers. Now, they have to get us to be willing to share that content. And so, yeah, they spend a lot of time optimizing the platform and making it engaging and solving that social need. But they do that so that we'll put our content on and that we'll spend time on the platform so that they can then monetize it with advertisers. All right, let's try a different company like Lyft, which is like a traditional marketplace. What is the pain point that Lyft solves? Who's their customer and what pain point do they solve? What business are they in? Anybody?
They're in the business of transportation services and they make it very accessible, especially compared to like it used to be where you have to hail a taxi or something.
So what do you mean they make it really accessible? For whom?
For the average person. I don't know. Really just anybody, I guess.
Anybody like who needs to get from point A to point B?
Anybody that needs to get from point A to point B and has a smartphone and has the app, has a credit card. I don't know.
All right. Anybody else have a thought or opinion?
Usually it's someone who really, really needs it and they don't have any other options.
Okay. Anyone else have a thought?
I think it's kind of convenient too, and just easy, similar to McDonald's, where instead of having to find a cab and not know what the rate is going to be, you can see quickly, who the driver is, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost. And I think similarly for the driver, they know before entering that contract, they're not just waiting, hoping that they can get business. And so it's solving that pain point as well.
Yeah. So while I do agree that Lyft does provide value to the passengers, I want you to think about this. I think Lyft's business, their customer, and the pain point they really solve is for drivers. Think about it this way. If I wanted to set up my own taxi company, I wanted to like go out and do that tomorrow, what are all the hurdles that I would have to face? Baseline is I'd have to have a vehicle, right? But then I also have to have a way to take payments, right? And if it's just cash, like it's cash, but if they want to pay with credit card, which most people want to do, right? Like I gotta have a credit card. If I want an experience like Lyft, I gotta have an app and I gotta convince my passengers to download and use that app, right? Which is tough. I've got to be able to get customers. So I got to handle the marketing side of it. I got to have the licenses. I have to have the insurance, right? Like there are all these things that I gotta have. And Lyft does an amazing job of basically taking care of all of that. If I want to drive for Lyft, I could be up and running this afternoon, right? Tomorrow afternoon, I could be out driving for Lyft like that, and they would send me business. And the way they monetize that is they take a commission effectively, right? They're like, hey, we sent you a customer. We get to take a cut of the revenue from that customer because of all these things we're providing for you. We're providing payments, we're providing trust, we're providing the app, we're providing customers, we're providing insurance, right? Like the list goes on and on. But the person that actually provides the value of getting you from point A to point B is not Lyft. Lyft does not own vehicles. They do not have drivers on staff that go around driving cars, right? The driver is the one that provides that value, right? Each driver is their own small business, and that's the value that they generate is by getting you from point A to point B. They just happen to do it through the Lyft or in some cases Uber platform, right? So it's important to spend some time like really understanding your customer excuse me, and their pain point. All right. So once you figure out like, okay, this is my business, this is the business that the company is in, then you got to start thinking about strategy. What is business strategy? What do y'all think? Any ideas? How would you explain business strategy to, like, you know, your 10-year-old cousin? Come on, we got 37 people here. Nobody has an answer or an idea?
Personally, I feel like, oh, sorry about that.
Go for it, Katie.
Awesome. I just feel like business strategy at its heart is just making a plan and setting like trackable objectives. And so when everyone's like on the same page and has the same culture, they know like when we're doing what we want to be as a business, going in the right direction. So like making those plans and make sure everyone's on the same page and on the same, catching the same vision.
Okay. So it's like your plan of attack. Anybody else have something to add or a different perspective?
I would say that business strategy oftentimes can involve risk, how much risk the leaders of the business, the management are willing to take on, whether it's for profit margins, growth, different things like that.
Okay.
I would say it's like your roadmap of how you're going to gain a competitive advantage over your competitors.
Ooh, I like that. What do you mean by that? A competitive advantage? What does that mean?
Basically, how are you going to create and capture value and draw in consumers to buy your product versus other people's? So differentiating your product or becoming like a cost leader. It involves like, I don't know, just differentiating your product and making yourself known to people so they'll buy your product instead.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's what I'm going to suggest. Strategy is the art of creating monopolies, right? So think about some of the things she said. You want your product to be differentiated. You want your product to be different than anybody else's, so that it's the only one, right? And monopolies, what's a monopoly? Monopoly is like the only seller of a given product. And there are basically two ways to create a monopoly. Ultimately, you either make something that is better than anybody else can make it, and or you make it cheaper than anybody else can make it, right? And your plan that was mentioned earlier is how you go about doing that, right? That's your strategy. That's your business strategy. So think about Facebook. We go back to Facebook. Does anybody do a better job than Facebook in terms of direct targeted advertising? Not really, right? Because nobody else has that much data on individuals, right? So their product is superior to pretty much everybody else, which is why they're valued so highly and why they generate such massive profits, right? That's part of the equation. Now, the flip side is, somebody mentioned this earlier, how much does Facebook pay all of us for all of that data that we give to them? Very little, right? I mean, it's not really zero because they spend a lot of money around like building great experiences on their platforms that draw engagement and so forth, but they're not actually paying us for that content that we freely give to them, right? And so they have a lower cost structure than anybody else too. And so when you have a better product than anyone else, and you can charge a higher price than anyone else, and you have a lower cost structure than anybody else, all of that is profit, which is why Facebook can generate massive profits and is so highly valued. And the biggest threats to their business, right, are things like anything that would reduce the amount of data that they get for free from customers, right? Or anything that would reduce their ability to create targeted ads. All right, so spend some time digging into the strategy of your business. Are they trying to be the very best relative to everybody else? Or are they trying to have the lowest cost structure? And ideally, are they doing both? Now, to be better than everybody else can be really hard, right? And so sometimes you're not always the very best to everybody, right? Some people don't like using Facebook or Instagram, and they do other things in order to be either entertained or find social connection, right? Maybe they use TikTok, or maybe they go to the movies, or maybe they have game nights, or whatever it might be, right? They go to the bars. It could be a lot of different alternatives, right, for that. And that gets to this idea of being different. So you may love Apple products, right? Or you may hate Apple products, but you have to admit Apple products are great products. And for the customers that buy them, right, they love them, right? I don't happen to really like Apple products for a variety of reasons, but I do appreciate that they are high quality products and that they are better in a lot of cases than everything else. So, but for me, there are other things that I value that Apple doesn't provide. And so I use different products, right? That's the idea of being differentiated. Apple is saying, okay, if these are the things that are important to you, like convenience, ease of use, it looks cool, everyone else will think I'm cool for using it, right? Those types of things are high value to you, then Apple provides by far the best product. If you want other things like the ability to really have deep control over your devices and your applications, and you want to customize it just the way you want, maybe a product like Android is more interesting to you, right? They're different. And each one provides value in different ways for different customers. But for those customers that value those things, Apple is the best in some areas and Android is the best in others, right? So that's another thing you need to be thinking about is when you're comparing your company to others that are doing a similar thing, like what is their strategy? Are they trying to be the best for everybody? Are they trying to be the best for a specific group that's willing to pay a lot of money? What does that look like? And or do they have a cost structure that gives them an advantage on that side of things? Great venture investments have both, but not all great venture investments require both. All right. Beyond that, like there are different types of strategies. So differentiation, when I say that, I want you to think like, you know, we make the best product. Low cost is low cost, like we have the lowest cost. But then you can go to, like I said, like maybe you make a niche product or maybe you make a product for a broad range of buyers. Now, I really like using shoe brands because everybody knows shoe brands to kind of make this more concrete. So when you think about a broad differentiation strategy, think high quality for lots of different types of consumers. What shoe brand do you think fits that description? And yes, there's one in particular I'm thinking of. Anybody? Nobody knows. This is the easiest one. I bet a bunch of you are wearing their shoes right now.
Nike.
Nike, thank you, Nike. So think about Nike, right? They make a shoe for everybody, right? You're a runner, sprinter, soccer player, jogger, stay-at-home mom. Like until recently, I think they made dress shoes. They have golf shoes, like they got it all. The shoes are all like pretty high quality, right? They're like pretty well made, usually not super cheap, right? Yeah, really good quality. Nike, perfect. All right, what is a focused differentiation strategy? So very high end, but just one customer target.
Rolex.
Now we're talking shoes. Shoe brands.
Gucci.
Gucci makes shoes. Okay, yeah, that's a good one. What's another one? They also make a lot of other stuff.
Like Asics, aren't those like only running shoes?
Yeah, okay, Asics. That's not a bad one, right? We just make running shoes. We don't do tennis shoes. It's just running shoes. We make very high-end running shoes. Any other thoughts? How about Alan Edmonds? Do you guys know Alan Edmonds, the gentleman out there? All right, Alan Edmonds, they make very high-end dress shoes. They start at like $300 or $400 and go up from there. You could spend $1,000 on a pair of really nice Allen Edmonds, and you will never need to buy another pair of dress shoes again because they'll last forever. They're extremely well built if you take care of them, right? But they're expensive, and they only do men's dress shoes. That's it. What about like Jimmy Choo's for women, right? Really high-end stilettos. All right, how about a focused low-cost strategy? So now we're focusing on low cost for a niche group.
Crocs.
Crocs? Are Crocs really that cheap though? They're kind of expensive, I think.
Shaq basketball shoes.
What basketball shoes?
The Shaquille O'Neal Walmart basketball shoes.
And ones.
And ones. Those aren't bad. Those aren't bad examples. But to be a true low cost, if you can name the brand, you're probably already wrong. So they're the shoes at Walmart, but they're not even like the Shaq shoes, right? There's a company out there and all they do is make like cheap flip-flops, right? And they make them as cheap as they possibly can, right? It's just like a slab of foam with a little like, toe holder made out of plastic, right? We've all worn them, seen them, bought them, whatever, right? Like that is an example of a focused low cost strategy. We only make sandals and we make them as cheap as we possibly can, right? What about an overall low cost leadership strategy? There used to be a company, a retail brand that was a good example of this.
Like Skechers?
No, not Skechers. Save that one though, we'll come back to it. There used to be a retail store. They actually filed bankruptcy a few years ago. Anybody familiar with Payless? Anybody remember that store? Today, instead of Payless, I think it's probably like Walmart, right? You go to Walmart, like that whole section of shoes, right? Kind of fits that. They offer a lot of different kinds of shoes, but they're all like super low cost. And then what about like best cost, right? You got some variety, but not everything. They're not like the most expensive. They're not super cheap either. Somebody mentioned it, Kenny.
Skechers.
Skechers, right? I think Skechers like fits perfectly in that, right? It's got a decent brand. It's well recognized. The shoes are decent quality. They're not like as nice as Nike's, but they're not, cheap Walmart shoes either. Like right in the middle, right? Okay. Hopefully that's helpful to start thinking about like what kind of strategy your company has. And ultimately what you want is your company to have a strategy where there aren't a lot of other companies right on top of them doing the same thing, right? You want to have, ideally, like if they're going to be differentiated in a broad way, they're the ones doing it that way and not, everyone else isn't also fighting for that same space. Okay. So before I move on from that, any questions around business strategy and what you want to be looking for in your businesses there? All right. Let's talk about markets. All right, I love this quote. We invest in college dropouts with insane ideas going after tiny markets with no way to monetize. Anybody know who Ben Horowitz is? Anybody heard of him? So he works for a little venture fund called Andreessen Horowitz. which is arguably one of the top venture funds in the world. I can't even remember how many billions of dollars they have under management. And they were early investors in some of the hottest companies that are out there today, like Lyft, like Airbnb, like Instagram. Instagram was one of Ben Horowitz's deals specifically. So when he says we invest in college dropouts with insane ideas going after tiny markets with no way to monetize, does that sound like a winning investment strategy to you? What do you think he's really saying? Anybody?
Maybe like they invest in the people.
Okay, they invest in college dropouts.
Like they're dedicated to what they're doing over like getting an education.
Ooh, okay, I like that. Dedicated. What about in terms of markets? Does Andreessen Horowitz really invest in tiny markets?
I was going to say they see value where others may not.
Okay. If you invest in a market that's already established, think about it this way. We talked about pain points, right? If a market is already established, what does that infer about your pain point? It's probably already being solved, right? But if it's a tiny market with huge potential to grow, then maybe it's a pain point that people have overlooked or that they're not addressing completely. Like Airbnb. And yes, this is their original logo. What pain point? Think about this. You're an investor in the very early days of Airbnb. This would have been what, 16 years ago, because they launched when Obama was first running for president. Okay, so it was Obama versus McCain, and they have this great story. So they struggled to raise money, right? And we'll come back to that. And so what they did is they made these cereal boxes. They had Obama O's and Captain McCain, or yeah, Captain McCain's, and they sold them at the conventions. And it was like this like souvenir type thing. And they sold like, I can't remember, like $500,000 worth of cereal during the conventions, and they used that to help start their company, as well as like get their brand out and everything else. So kind of a fun story. But they went to like tons of venture funds, and tons of venture funds like laughed them out of the room because it was a crazy idea. You're gonna let some total stranger you don't know sleep in your house, on your couch, or in your bed, like in your spare bedroom, or you're going to sleep in a total stranger's house. You are going to get murdered in your sleep, right? Like this is an insane idea. And how many people do you think were actually doing this before Airbnb? Like renting out a room in somebody else's house for like an overnight stay. Like nobody was. So super tiny market, right? And then you add on to that, like who is going to pay for that experience, right? Maybe thrill seekers, but that was about it, right? So it kind of fits that criteria almost perfectly, right? But today Airbnb is valued at what? It's like $100 billion company, more or less, depending on the day and the stock price. But it's a big company, right? 100 billion, that's bigger than most markets that are out there. So what happened? What was Ben Horowitz really investing in? What was the pain point? What was the market? Nobody knows. They've never stayed in an Airbnb.
I would probably say price or convenience and locations.
Okay, price, convenience, locations.
If you need more space in like a kitchen versus a hotel.
Okay. Specific needs for the property. Here's a question. Who's the customer of Airbnb?
Travelers.
Okay, travelers are one of the customers. Who's the other customer?
The renters.
People with the space to sell.
Yeah, people with space to sell, right? Think about when Airbnb launched. What was it right in the middle of? I mean, maybe y'all were too young to remember this. I remember it really well because it was right when I graduated.
I was gonna guess the financial crisis.
The financial crisis.
2008 recession.
2008 recession. So, what was happening? What caused the crisis?
The housing bubble.
The housing bubble. People were sitting in these homes that were and they had a ton of debt on a house that was losing value. And in many cases, they were losing their jobs. So what did Airbnb provide for them?
A way to pay their mortgage.
Yeah, they provided a new income stream that they didn't have access to. Now, here's the flip side. How many people wanted to travel but couldn't afford to travel because hotels were too expensive? Right? A lot of people. Like you can stay, even to this day, you can stay in an Airbnb for like 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks a night, right? If you're just renting a room. That same room would easily cost you $100 at another hotel. If you wanted to rent a whole house, right, on Airbnb, that might be a couple $100s a night. But if you were to rent that same suite at a hotel, that could be thousands of dollars a night. And so what it did is it effectively, there was this pain point out there, this huge market opportunity that was untapped because people couldn't afford to travel. And Airbnb came in and said, you know what? We're going to take this asset that's just sitting there, doing nothing, and we're going to open it up to all these people. And because it's an asset that's sitting there, the cost basis of that room is so much lower than a typical hotel that the cost to stay there can come down a lot, and that can open up this huge market. And so even though, yes, Airbnb has stolen market share from the big hotels, it hasn't stolen as much as you might think. Instead, what it's done is massively grow the entire market. And by doing that, I would argue that the cost of travel, because Airbnb helped reduce the overall cost of travel so drastically, it changed the way that generations think about travel, right? Millennials love to travel. Gen Z loves to travel. And largely, I think that, not largely, but I think in part, that was due to companies like Airbnb that drastically reduced the cost to be able to enjoy that, to enjoy those types of experiences. All right, so what's important? What's important though, is not that we're investing in tiny markets, it's that we're investing in markets that have the potential to become massive, right? And why do VCs care about massive markets?
They need to provide like 10% or 10 times returns.
They need to provide 10 times returns. And so what does that have to do with VC or with markets?
Just have to be able to like scale really quick and get really big.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to our fund example from last time. You have a $100 million fund. You're going to make 10 investments, 10 million each, right? We're just keeping the math simple here. You assume you get 20% ownership in each company for that investment. If you want to return your whole fund on one investment, that company would need to sell for $500 million, right? Remember this math? We did this last time. 10 investments, 10 million bucks. You get 20% of the company. The company sells for $500 million. You own 20% of that. So it's $100 million that returns your fund. You need to do that because of power law distribution, like we talked about last time. There may only be one deal in your entire fund that returns your entire fund, right? What does that mean from a market perspective? Is that in order to sell for that much, the company probably has to generate 100 million in revenue. And so if you operate in a $10 billion market, that would equate to 10% market share, which is very difficult to achieve, but is possible. If your market gets even bigger and you operate in a $1 trillion market, right? Then that becomes a much, much, much smaller market share and becomes a lot more doable. And so the larger the market share, the easier it is for your company to scale. Now, in a lot of cases, you don't know exactly what the market share is, right? You look at Airbnb and you say, well, we don't know what the market share is, but we know that hotels are a tangent market and they're, you know, this big. And then you can start talking about, we think that there's going to be this massive shift by reducing the cost of travel. That will open up this additional market. And maybe the true market is not just hotels. Maybe the true market is actually like all rentals. Because during the pandemic, how many people out there have like sold their home or ditched the city and said, you know what, I'm going to Cabo for the pandemic, and I'm just going to live in Cabo, or I'm going to live out in the country, or I'm going to live up in the mountains, or I'm going to live wherever it might be because I can work from wherever. And that in large part was facilitated by companies like Airbnb. So thinking about like what's the potential of your market and how fast it's growing. The other thing is, if you invest in a market that's growing very quickly, you can just kind of ride along for the, you know, be there along for the ride. And as long as you have a decent product and you're able to solve a need there, your company should grow at least at the rate of the market, right? So there's a lot of advantages to being in a market that's got potential to be really big and is growing really, really fast. But ultimately, if your market is only $500 million in size, that's going to be really hard for you to build a company that's large enough to ultimately return your entire fund, and that's what you need. You need deals that have the potential to return your whole fund. So market tends to be this incredibly important thing, particularly at the seed stage. You know, we joke in venture that at the seed stage, like really what you're evaluating is your management team and your market size, because your company will probably pivot a handful of times. But as long as they're operating in a really big market, they, you know, eventually they can kind of find their way and do well. But the only way that they're going to do that is if they have a good management team that can eventually find their way in the desert, right? In the wilderness. All right. So we talk a lot, I'm sure you guys have heard the terms TAM, SAM, SUM, right? Total addressable market, which is like the total possible demand for your product. So for Airbnb, that might be like hotels and like everybody that could possibly rent their home, and like rental income, and maybe even mortgages, right? Like everything. Like if everybody just decided tomorrow, I don't want to own anything, I just want to live, you know, I basically just want to pay rent and I want to change houses every month, right? Like that could happen. That would be like your TAM, just gigantic, enormous. Your SAM is going to be your addressable market. So that's going to be based on your current business model. Now today, like Airbnb really doesn't compete with like mortgages, right? And they don't really compete for the most case with people that are paying rent. They do maybe a little bit, but that's really not their business model, right? So maybe your SAM for an Airbnb really is just like honing in on like hospitality, generally speaking. And then your SUM is the market that, you know, based on the practical limits of your business model. So if Airbnb isn't in Thailand, they don't get to count Thailand's market opportunity in their total market because, or in their SUM, because they're not there yet, for example, right? So that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is the example I always use, which is like I have a Chinese restaurant. My TAM for a Chinese, if I have a Chinese restaurant in downtown Salt Lake City, my TAM might be like everybody that's hungry within like a reasonable radius of my restaurant. My SAM might be everybody that likes Chinese food, right? Because that's my business model. I sell Chinese food. And then my SOM might be like how many tables and chairs I have within my restaurant, right? Because I can't serve more people than I can fit into my restaurant given my business model. So it can be helpful to kind of think through these different parts of the market and, you know, to what extent the company you're looking at, you know, how big is their SOM, how big is their SAM, how big is their TAM, and do you believe they have the potential to kind of grow that over time or move from their SOM into their SAM? And if your investment requires that they move from their SOM into their SAM, that just increases the risk. But if you can show like, no, our SOM alone is really, really compelling. And by the way, we have this greater opportunity over here, but we never even have to get there because our SOM is so compelling. Like that becomes a really interesting potential investment. Because otherwise, like there's a lot of risk, right? If all of a sudden, the more things I have to accomplish, just adds more risk to the business. All right, and then just some things to hit on when you're analyzing the market, things that can matter in terms of what's driving that market. So you can think about like demographics and population. So this would be like the baby boomers that are all retiring and dying, and like, you know, there's all kinds of healthcare needs that they have and so on and so forth. So what you'll see, right, is like baby boomers are a much bigger generation than Gen X. And so you'd expect to see healthcare rise, but then as baby boomers die off and Gen X comes, like there are not as many of them, so maybe healthcare drops. But then baby boomers are actually an even bigger population, so maybe it's going to rise again, right? So that's how you can have like these fluctuations in market size based on demographics and population. You could have technological advances. So we talked about virtual reality, right? Virtual reality is not fully adopted today because the technology is not there yet, I believe. But it's catching up. And eventually, like technology will arrive for virtual reality that'll make it more and more accessible and more compelling for people to use. And when that happens, the market for VR will grow exponentially. It could also be things like Bitcoin. So Bitcoin today is hitting like all new highs, right? Like $66,000 or $67,000 per Bitcoin, right? That's great. That's happening in part because it's becoming easier and easier and easier to trade, to buy, hold, and sell Bitcoin, right? Part of what drove it up today was the fact that a Bitcoin ETF went public. And so now you can buy into this ETF for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency. That makes it like easier for everybody to participate, right? That's kind of a technological advance in many ways that's increasing the size of that market. Could be like, where is it in the product life cycle? So when you think about diapers, way back in the day, diapers were like this brand new invention. And the market was really small, but as people started to find out about them and how amazing they were at solving that pain point, right? The market grew really fast until pretty much it became the standard quo. And now everybody has and uses diapers. And so like that market is really plateaued. It's probably not going to grow much more, right? And it'll ultimately be pegged at like the rate of population growth. You could have external factors. So, right, the marijuana industry has totally exploded, and that's largely driven by laws that have legalized it. You can have network effects. So like fax machines, social networks, those kinds of things where they start off really, really slow, but then as people use them, the value of adding one more unit goes up with each unit that's added. And so they grow slow and then all of a sudden they spike. Right, so you can have markets that operate like that. And then you can have just customs and culture that play a huge role in markets, right? You have super trendy things where like overnight, You know, everybody's got to have the Tickle Me Elmo for their kid for Christmas one year. And then the next, you know, the day after Christmas, the market totally collapses and disappears. That's one that you need to be really careful about, particularly if you're looking at anything consumer related, is understanding is this just like a cultural phenomenon? Is this a trend? Is this a trendy thing? Or is this a long-term change in society, right? You could look at TikTok and you could say, is TikTok trendy? Or is it really going to be here for the long run? And you could have a meaningful debate around that, right? Some people would argue, nah, it's just a trendy thing that people think is cool now, but it's going to go away eventually. And other people say, no, this is like how social is going to be done for the next 50 years, right? It's going to be here to stay. Or maybe not that long, maybe it's some iteration of those. But, you know, really thinking through like what are the customs and what is the culture that's driving this can be really important to evaluating like the future growth and what's going to happen in your market. And I'll tell you, it's something that we think a lot about when we're looking at consumer deals. All right, any questions on market? Big punchlines. Look for markets that are really big or have the potential to be really big because they're solving a huge pain point for customers, right? That's what you need. Big markets. Don't look at anything that's less than $1 billion in size. It's kind of the rule of thumb. And really in this day and age, it's probably like 10 billion in size. All right, let's talk about competition. So here's how I think about competition. How many people are familiar with Porter's 5 forces? Yeah, Porter's 5. Come on, everybody knows Porter's 5. All right, Porter's 5 forces. Here's I'm going to tell you one of my pet peeves. Everybody, not everybody, but most people look at Porter's 5 forces and they apply it to a company, an individual company. It should not be applied to an individual company. Porter's 5 forces is an evaluation of a market, or not really a market, but an industry, okay? And it's based in the value chain of that industry. So a value chain is simply the chain through which value is added at every step. So if I have these notebooks. These notebooks once upon a time used to be nothing more than like a seed, dirt, and water and sunshine, right? So there are tracts of land where all they do is plant trees to grow them, to harvest them, turn them into paper. That's all they do, right? So like that's where you start. You start with wood that gets turned into paper pulp that turns into big reams of paper that then gets cut down, right, in the manufacturing process, and then it gets bound together into this notebook. And then this notebook has to be sold to somebody, like a distributor, and then that distributor, they sell it to retailers, and then retailers sell it to me and you, right? But if you think about it generally, like value chains break down into 3 major components. You have raw materials, you have manufacturing, you have distribution. All right, so Porter's 5 forces is an evaluation of that value chain and the competitiveness of the value chain. So let's assume that my company makes ham sandwiches, right? That's what we do. We manufacture ham sandwiches. I have to buy the bread from somebody, and that bread provider, if there's only one of them that I can buy bread from because they have a patent on bread making, they have a lot of power, and that's called supplier power, right? Because I can only buy it from them, and so they can kind of charge, not whatever they want, but they can charge really high prices for it because they don't have any competitors. On the other hand, maybe there are lots of restaurants that are out there that will buy my ham sandwich and distribute it to my customers, right? And because there's a lot of them, they have very low buyer power, right? Because if one won't buy my ham sandwich, there are lots of other people that will buy it, or that will buy it at a higher price, right? There's a lot of competition, so buyer power is lower. Now, there could be other sandwich manufacturers in my industry, and that's called rivalry, right? Where I compete against them. And then there's this idea of threat of entrance, right? So there could be people that want to start businesses that manufacture sandwiches that enter into my industry. because let's be honest, it's not that hard to make a sandwich. And then you have this whole other value chain that sits off to the side of my value chain that makes substitutes. Substitutes solve the same pain point that I do, but they do it in a different way, right? So in this case, maybe it's a company that makes pizza, right? Which is, the pain point is I need a portable way to consume food. I do it with sandwiches, this other value chain, they do it with pizza, right? For example. So why do I lay all this out? Because all 5 of these are sources of competitive threats to a business that you should understand. So everybody always thinks about rivalry as the main one, right? Who else is making ham sandwiches out there? But if you're not thinking about the substitutes, you're like the movie theaters that totally got blindsided by Facebook, because movie theaters were selling entertainment and a social entertainment experience, and Facebook came in and totally like crushed them because they did it arguably better, right? People are spending a lot more time on Facebook than they were going out to the movies. So you want to be cognizant of your substitutes. If you're not thinking about your suppliers and the supplier power, I mean, how hard is it if you're a bread manufacturer, or if you make bread and you supply bread, to start making ham sandwiches? Probably not that difficult, right? And so you could be threatened with vertical integration from your suppliers, or you could be threatened from vertical integration from your buyers who start making ham sandwiches and then distributing them directly to their patrons, right? So you want to understand both sides of that as well. And then you also want to understand how hard is it for somebody to enter my market and start doing what I do. And that's your threat of entrance. All 5 of those are, like I said, are sources of competitive threat. And so something that you want to be taking seriously as you're evaluating your business. If you're looking at a company and it's really easy to launch the same company or a similar company, that's a threat of entrance. That should be like a big red flag that you should be worried about, right? If you have a supplier and they are the only supplier in what you do, they actually could do better than you or just as good, you should be worried, right? And the same thing on the distribution side. Like a good example of this is if you're Apple, right? Well, not if you're Apple. If you make a smartwatch, right? And you think about this before Apple launches the Apple Watch. Should you be worried about Apple? Probably, because Apple distributes product to a lot of your customers, right? And especially if your smartwatch works with their iPhone, right? You should probably be worried because they can arguably create a better and more affordable, well, maybe not more affordable, but they can create a watch with better margins, like a lower cost to them than you can, because they have massive scale and they can sell it to your customers and undercut and cut you out, right? So that's what happened to the very first smartwatch that really took off, called Pebble, which I actually bought through their Kickstarter campaign because it was super cool back in the day, and eventually got crushed by Apple with the Apple Watch and put out of business, despite having a really cool product and being like by far and away the first mover in that market. All right. So just some things to think about when you're looking at like all those different competitive threats. You want to try to figure out like what are the factors that will determine who will win. And so one of the questions I like understanding or asking is spending time understanding the customer and the pain point, and like why does the market even exist to begin with, right? What is that pain point that needs to be solved? Well, like if I'm thinking about an Apple Watch, my pain point, right, might be like, I don't want to pull my phone out of my pocket for a number of reasons. I want to just look on my wrist and be able to answer phone calls, see text messages, play my music, whatever it might be. So that's my pain point. Who's going to do it better? Is it going to be some third party, or is it going to be a company that's integrated directly with my iPhone? Well, it's probably going to be the company that, is directly integrated with my iPhone, because they're going to be able to solve the pain point so much better than anybody else, right? So you want to be thinking like, what is that pain point, and do you believe that the competitor can solve it better than you can? Now, the flip side is there are a lot of cases where, we're an investor in a company called Toast. Toast does point of sale systems for restaurants. And, if you look at their competitors like NCR, they use this really old, crappy software. Restaurateurs hate it because it's old and it doesn't work super well. And Toast works a lot better. And so in that case, it's like, yeah, NCR might have the customers today, but people don't like them. And Toast has a much better product. And so it's going to be hard for NCR to really catch up and compete. And on top of that, Toast's first mover advantage actually gives them a real advantage because they have all these restaurants on the platform. They know exactly what they want. They've built product that meets their needs specifically. And they have a ton of proof points so that when they go to sell another restaurant, they can point to a bunch of others that use and love the product, right? So there could be a lot of different ways in which you could point to as to why your company would win over somebody else, but you really got to understand kind of that pain point and how your company is solving it relative to others. For the competition, I highly recommend using these strategy maps, as I call them. So this is an example of one. This is a company that called Cuberhood, and what they were saying is we want to make a product that really solves the needs of marketers. So what you had is you had a bunch of like single focused products. Like we do one thing really, really well in social media marketing tools. And you had others that provided a comprehensive solution, but they were really closed. Like you couldn't integrate with other things, right? So you had point solutions that were really good with integrating with lots of other platforms, and you had others that were like, we do everything, but we don't integrate with anybody, right? And what Cuberhood was trying to say is like, no, we're going to build this like open platform where you can take all these point solutions and you can plug them into our platform, and they all speak together and it's all in one place. And so that's how we're differentiated and how we're better. Now, in your case, like sometimes it's like, hey, this is quality versus breadth of target customer or whatever it might be. But this can be oftentimes like a really effective way to show how your company compares to the competitors and why it's better and or different in solving the pain point. Now, of course, what you'd want to be able to say is like, here in this case, like what customers really want is they want an open platform that integrates with lots of things, but they don't want to have to log into like 20 different apps. They want something that's more convenient. They want to log into one app, right? So as you think about your business that you're evaluating, and you want to indicate that like they have the best solution, you want to be thinking about like what are those two things, or maybe you do more than one graph that really illustrate what customers want, right? What is going to solve their pain point? And then plotting your company relative to the other ones to demonstrate like, yeah, this company that we've targeted is providing the very best solution for our companies, or for our customers, they're their customers, right? Relative to everybody else. So it's gonna be like a really effective visual tool to use to do that. All right, so when you're evaluating your competitors, I think it's really, look, you only have so much time, and you only have so much time in your presentation as well. So you need to identify like who are the biggest top competitive threats. You need to figure out what are the factors that are going to determine who's going to win. And you need to be thinking about what your company's sources of competitive advantages are. So what keeps another company from doing the same thing as what you're doing, or accessing the same target market? And being able to articulate that to the judges or to your investment committee as to why your company is like solving the right pain point in a way that's better than anybody else, and they've done it in such a way that it's hard for other people to replicate. So like one source of advantage, right? If you're Lyft or you're Uber, it's really hard to build a marketplace, right? You got to get the drivers and you got the passengers, and you have this chicken and egg problem, right? But here's the thing, if you can solve the chicken and egg problem and you now have both drivers and riders on the platform, it's really hard for somebody else because they have to solve that chicken and egg problem. And it gets even harder because customers will look at them and say, I don't need to help you because I can just go to Uber and Lyft, right? They already are providing a vastly superior solution. And so that creates like this real barrier to entry, right? So you want to be looking for like, what is the barrier that will keep competitors out for your business? All right, so any questions on competition or market or business model or strategy? I know I've just thrown a ton at you. Everyone's got it. They're like, done. I'm an expert.
I guess for business strategy, you had the graph that talked about differentiation, low cost, and then the different markets. When we're choosing companies, is there a certain position that's better for venture capitalists to be investing in on that graph, or not necessarily? We just need to identify that.
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, I would say generally that graph was really focused on either having a cost advantage or a quality advantage. I would say like the best venture deals have both, right? They're like Facebook. Nobody does Facebook, nobody does social better than Facebook, really, right? And nobody has the same like low cost when it comes to collecting data that can be leveraged by advertisers than Facebook, right? So they have both. If you look at like Microsoft has a huge advantage because it's really cheap to create one more unit of software, right? It's super scalable. And yet, because everybody uses Microsoft software, everybody has to use Microsoft software. And so it ends up being like the best solution, right? Now, could somebody come up with a better Excel? Yeah, maybe, probably. But nobody would really use it, or it would be hard to get adoption because everybody else already knows and uses Excel, and it's easy to exchange files and so on and so forth. So you could look at Amazon, same thing. Like Amazon has such massive scale today that they can buy at massive quantities and undercut most other competitors. So they have a cost advantage, but then they have a value, they have a quality advantage in that like you can go to Amazon, you can buy everything. You can buy everything in Amazon. And so why would you go anywhere else? As long as the prices are competitive, right? Saves you time, it's convenient. You know what you're going to get. They stand behind it. There's less risk, right? There's all these things. So ultimately, that's what you want to be looking for is ideally a company that has both. Good question. But whether they target like a broad range of buyers or like a niche group, I don't think that that's as important. Any other questions? All right. We've been here for a long time, so let's wrap this up. Okay, so for your diligence write-up, really you're gonna do a presentation. So we're not gonna make you do like a full investment memo, unless you want to, but really like we want like a really good deck. For your business model and strategy, your questions you need to solve is like, what is a pain point? Who is a customer? How does a company solve the pain point? Okay. And then you need to articulate, how does the company make money? How do they capture some of the value that they're creating for customers? Now, they're not going to capture all the value, that's fine, but they need to be able to be capturing a sizable amount of it. Think about like airlines. Airlines will get you from anywhere to anywhere in the world, right? Massive, massive value creation. But how much are they able to really like monetize that? Airline flights are relatively affordable, right? So they're not very good at monetizing the value that they create. You want to be investing in a company that creates massive value and is able to capture most of that. And the way that you do that is you invest in companies that have really strong competitive advantages, right? That's their strategy. If there was only one airline in the world, airline tickets would be much, 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 much more expensive than they are today. All right, the next question, the next section is your market. So how big is the market? What's your TAM, your SAM, your SOM? How quickly is it growing? What's driving that growth? Be able to defend that, like, this is a big market, it's growing quickly, this, you know, or maybe it's not a big market today, but has the potential to become a big market. And like I said, it's growing quickly. What's driving that growth ultimately? And is that going to continue to grow into the future? Is this the kind of market where we want to be investing? And then not lastly for your presentation, but lastly for tonight, your competition. So who are the top competitors? How is your company positioned relative to them? Are they providing a better product? Are they providing a lower cost product? Are they doing both? Are they solving pain points in ways that the competition isn't, right? Like what's making them unique? And then what are the company's sources of competitive advantage? Maybe they have network effects because they're a marketplace. Maybe they have patents, right, that keep others from copying what they do. Maybe they have access to unique resources. Maybe they have access to unique knowledge, right, that other people don't have, or special partnerships or relationships, right? It could be all kinds of different things that create competitive advantage. So spend some time really understanding that and being able to explain it and why it's defensible and meaningful for the company. All right. Any questions on that? This doesn't have to be 3 slides. This can be more than 3 slides. Just make sure that you address kind of these major questions. All right, next workshop's next week. Your 3 companies are due the end of this week. They don't have to be due to the 22nd. Let's make them due. We're not even gonna look at them until the 25th. So let's make them due the 24th. Give you all weekend, get them done. Now, you just have to give us 3 companies. And mostly this is for your benefit. We just want to make sure you're cranking on it and not procrastinating. So get us your 3 companies, and then you should already be starting to dig in on your due diligence, ideally on all of them. Now, the thing you need to be keeping in mind is your final diligence report is due November 5th. That's your big deliverable. So that's going to be your presentation. That's going to cover all the stuff that we covered tonight, plus all the stuff we're going to cover next week, all in a presentation format. And then that report can be as long as you want it to be as complete and as possible. When you do your final presentation, you're probably going to want to tighten it up if it's too long, because you're only going to have so much time to do your presentation. But for the diligence report, it can be as long as needed. So. All right. Any questions?
Yeah, did I hear you correct when you said that the 3 companies submission is due by the 24th now, not the 22nd?
That's right. Yep, I'm gonna give you a little more time.
Okay.
Yep. And honestly, you don't even need to, like, your final company doesn't even need to be one of the 3.
The due diligence report is for one company only, right?
That's right. Just one company. You're just going to pick one. We have you submit 3 because if you're doing your due diligence and you realize, like, oh crap, the CEO like sexually harassed somebody, we can't back him, right? Then you've got 2 more in the wings that you can fall back on, or whatever it might be. It could be a lot of things that kill a deal.
So where can I find the link to submit the companies?
We will be sending that out. So it will be on the website, and we'll send out a link as well in the email.
Okay, thank you.
And like I said, it'll be a really simple form. Name of the company, website, like 2 sentences on what they do. You could just cut and paste it from their website if you want. All right, well, I'll hang out a little bit longer in case any of you have questions. But thank you all for coming and sticking around and being patient with me at the beginning. Hopefully you all learned something tonight, and we're excited to see you all next week. Hope you all have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Peter.